So now I think we're ready to go into the last stage, which I find is really interesting. It's called introduction, but it's the last stage. So I'll play along. We're now, you've told me this is the last stage. We're going to be introducing. So Camilla, let's start with you. What is the introduction phase to consumer, and what does marketing do now?
Okay, so it's called introduction, basically, because at this point, it's all been behind the screen. Like, this has all been done internally, and the consumer hasn't seen anything. Last stage is introduction, is because this is when you actually introduce the food and introduce the brand and introduce the packaging to the consumer. So this is their first view into it. From a marketing perspective, there's a number of different elements you have to do. First thing you have to do is make sure people know about it. So I can make the food. If they don't know about it, they don't know to buy it.
Right.
We have to make sure it's accessible to them. So once we've made them aware of the food, then they go to the grocery store to buy it. It needs to be there. It needs to be on shelf. And lastly is that we continue to delight them and encourage them to keep buying and keep trying it. So in very kind of simple terms is we always hear about this path to purchase that the consumer would go through. That's what we basically follow from a marketing perspective. Once we have the food in hand, we follow the, we need to create the desire and the awareness of it. They need to want to buy it and be able to find it at shelf, and then kind of closing it off by actually eating it.
So Loretta, what is nutrition doing now?
Oh, certainly.
Are you working with these guys?
We're all at the table together. If that's one
Okay.
message from today, and even more so now, especially when it's such an innovative product and we've never done something like this before. As you might say, we're joined at the hip, because nutrition and regulatory needs to ensure that we have the right balance between the consumer relevance, of course, which is most important, and regulatory compliance. So nutrition science and regulatory, we perform all kinds of the science and regulatory checks on all components of the packaging, of the marketing plan, the sales plan, label copy. We help develop the copy, review the copy, claims, advertising, all of those checks we kind of double and triple check. And then our final message to marketing is, we're all clear, we're good to go.
So when Loretta says you're good to go, you must be feeling pretty good.
We're good at this point. It's been an extensive process at this point. So one of the key things, once we say, yep, we're good to go, and we can start building a campaign, all the marketing elements around it for consumers to drive awareness of it. That's when we start getting creative. Typically, one of the first things we do is we assess what's the best way to drive awareness. An example or standard kind of way is to create a TV spot. TV ad drives that quick awareness and build in terms of we have a new product to launch. In the case of Vector, we did create an ad, and I did bring it with us. It's a very simple 30-second spot targeted at our ambitious
So this is the original execution?
One of the originals.
Okay, so can we play that for the audience?
Vector has protein and 22 vitamins and minerals to help you get out what you put in.
So now that I look at that, I'm saying, okay, this is talking to ambitious actives. So this isn't talking to an Olympic athlete, and then it's not talking to someone who's watching television. It's talking to someone who's out there doing a various sport and trying to get better for themselves.
Right.
So that's all of the learning you took to make the television ad. So now I see we've got the picture up on the screen. So Loretta, we've got the ad. I understand the packaging was very, very innovative and different from a nutrition perspective. Take me through that.
Certainly, one of the roles, as I mentioned, was to review and approve label copy. That includes things like the ingredient list, like the nutrition panel. We have up here the nutrition panel for Vector. Because it is a meal replacement, it can't follow the nutrition facts panel that you see on most other foods,
yes.
But we are involved in making sure that it's compliant to the meal replacement regulations. We also then assess the product for claims and what we can say about the product and those claims that are relevant to consumers. So in the case of Vector, when it has the 22 vitamins and minerals, one of the regulatory areas for how we can talk about the function of a nutrient is the biological role claims. And what we developed then were the vector icons, and these kind of visuals had never been done before.
Right, yeah, just take a look at these. These are up on the screen now, and these are the icons that I guess the nutrition team developed with some type of an artist or whatever, but this is the first time this was done.
Yes, this was very, very innovative, and a way to express the function of the nutrient in a way that was fun and the consumer
It was
liked
visual.
and was relevant.
So give me an example of what's up here.
Okay, if we take then the picture there of the bone, that would go along with the claim that calcium helps build strong bones. So we
very
certainly still had to have the words there, but that's to kind of comply with the dry regulations, and we could make it more alive for consumers.
So you took Health Canada's dry regulations and gave them some visual oomph. Very good, very good. So Camilla, we've seen the television ad. Loretta's taken us through the innovative packaging, that sort of nutrition creative design of all the different biological role claims and nutrients there. We have that out there. What's the next step? What else is happening? How are we introducing this product?
So all those elements that you've talked about is primarily driving awareness and making people aware that the new food is available. So now we've created some desire and need for the food, and we know it's going to meet their needs. The next step is that making sure when the consumers go out to buy it and they go to the grocery stores, it's actually on shelf. So this is where our sales team really comes in and plays a significant role, where they meet with our customers and they meet with the category buyers and have them try the food and make sure that they understand what the role of the food is. So when consumers go to the store, it's actually available for them. They can actually buy it on shelf.
So when you said the sales people are going into the store, they're talking to the buyers of the various grocery stores, and they're explaining to them that this is a meal replacement. So that's interesting, because how do our sales guys know how to communicate that? Is this something you're helping out with, Loretta?
Well, exactly. Just the same way that we did with marketing and our concerted efforts to let marketing understand the regulations, the same thing with the sales force, with the clients, with the accounts, so that they also could understand something that was so innovative and coming to their stores and where they should place it. Well, where should we put this thing? It is up to the retailers on where they want to place the product, but again, the same type of learning to that group.
But just to continue on that note,
Sure.
you know, even though it's on shelf, doesn't mean consumers are going to be able to find it. Because it's new, they still don't know where it is or where they could find it. So we try to help them along the path also. So typical example where you do sampling in store. So that's how you introduce the new food to some of the consumers, get them actually taste it and try, and it's easy for them to find it. Or you do displays, or you do a shelf talker. It's just to call attention to it.
The tasting is interesting, because I know a lot of people, if it's new, and they say, well, I don't want to take that risk of buying something that my family's not going to eat.
Right.
So if I try it in the store, then okay.
It helps alleviate some of that risk. You know, even after we have it on shelf and the consumers have eaten the food and are buying the food and they're loving the food, we still continue to the discussion. We still continue to talk to them. We still continue to listen to them. We still continue the whole process of innovation. You know, it's not a linear process that starts with curiosity or conception and ends at consumption. It is really a circular process, and we're constantly curious at all stages of the path. So in the case of Vector, we started with the cereal meal replacement, but by being observant and watching these ambitious actives, that's how we also launched the Vector bars. There was a clear need and role for the consumers, so that's how we moved forward with it, because they were telling us that, you know, the Vector cereal is great at home, pre kind of their workout or pre their event. The Vector bars, they can take it with them.
Yeah, portability must have been huge for people who are active, right? Because
active.
they're doing activities, they want to take it with them. They don't want to be subject to whatever's in the environment when they're hungry. They want something that's going to fuel them.
Right.
And our activities certainly don't end at product launch either. Once the product is on the shelf, we are continuously doing the monitoring of the science. Is the science changing? Are the regulations changing?
Right, because sports nutrition probably has evolved since over the time.
And to make sure we remain current. So any product changes, it's not might not be just a simple fix, and we start the process all over again and go through all of the same steps. In the case of the vector bar, then that's another set of the regulations that came under the nutritional supplement regulation as opposed to meal replacement.
So Camilla, are we able to ask you what's next for Vector?
Probably not. You can ask, I won't answer.
What products will come out for these more ambitious actives?
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Okay, well, in terms of more questions, I'm going to throw it out to Dr. Chris and see if he has any more questions from our audience.
Thanks, Chris. This question came up from quite a few individuals in the audience. How did you come up with the name Vector, and what are the considerations that go into naming a new food or product?
That's interesting. Because yours, as we talked along this process, we made the food, it was in a white box, and then all of a sudden it's marketed as Vector. How did that come? Did you just wake up one morning?
Well, I wish that was the case. It follows actually the same process that you would do in creating the food itself. So you have to start with curiosity, and the curiosity is, what do we call this food? What is the brand that we're going to move forward with? So it all started with a question. With that question, you start coming up with ideas and different brand names, and you need to start exploring, what are my options, or what are the different names I could possibly use for this food that would meet the needs or be relevant for our ambitious actives. Then you validate. You have to check trademarks, you have to check translations. There's a number of different areas you have to check. So we may have started with 50 names, and then when you finally get to the validation, you're down to 2 or 3 names after you check trademarking and translation and other elements. You get those 2 or 3 names and you put them in front of consumers also.
So you go back and test the name with the consumer.
You test it with your ambitious actives.
Okay,
and you understand what that name means to them.
Right, so you've got to test in English Canada and French Canada.
That's right.
Wow.
You have to test it.
Wow.
And regulatory has a role too. We need to ensure that the name isn't a product claim or a claim that's not allowed by the regulations.
Wow. So the marketing probably gets a lovely name, and then nutrition goes, I'm sorry, you can't use that. Or then the government says, no, you can't do this. And so it's really, wow, very interesting. Okay, Chris, what else do we have out from the audience?
I have a question here talking about the possibility of a product changing once it's on the market to coincide with changes in trends or a more desirable nutrient profile. So does a product, once it's launched, go through a change later down the line?
Well, that's very interesting, because as science changes and there's different nutrients that are needed, or maybe the product, does it become less relevant and you make it more relevant, or how would you ever change a product that's already out there?
Well, we absolutely will change a product if we need to change the product, because it is kind of a circular process, and we're constantly listening and talking to our consumers and understanding what their needs are. And as their needs evolve, we have to evolve with them. And again, we come back to nutrition and the team to see if we can actually apply those changes to the food. If we can't change the existing food, we will launch new food. So you sometimes see new and improved or different extension of the food, of the brand, to start meeting the needs of the consumers.
So when you say an extension, what does that mean?
So an extension could be a different flavor extension.
Okay.
Okay, or a different fortification, or you're adding fiber to it. It depends on what you're doing, you can add to it.
Okay.
And in that case, from a regulatory perspective, you might be familiar with the product when you see a yellow new and improved flash. That's regulated. Your product has to have something new in it, and then that new and improved
use that flash.
can stay on the product for a year.
So the consumer knows you've done something to the product.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Chris, what else do we have out there?
This question is for Loretta. Can you explain how the nutrition facts table is created, and comment on its accuracy and if it's ever audited?
Very good question. That's probably interesting. I think you have a formula, and then all of a sudden it ends up as a nutrition facts panel. How does that happen in a company?
Well, that actually happens with the regulatory labeling and compliance group, and that is a science in and of itself. They maintain their nutrient databases, their ingredient list databases. Every single ingredient is broken down to, from the supplier, we get supplier spec sheets, and you have the analyticals from the supplier, and you go through the calculations of making it into the formula or what your recipe is. But we don't just stop at the calculations. Then the product needs to go through chemical analytical testing to ensure that you're meeting the target. So it's all part of the validation. And then part of what's written right within the regulation is you do have some leeway to account for types of variability that you might get, even in the case of some, crops and things, variability in nutrient levels in the crops. So it would never be one exact number that needs to be met, but within the range that's allowed by the regulations. And we constantly do that testing, not just when the product goes out and is made and is launched, but even on shelf.
So there's internal audits just to make sure that this is what the side panel says, and we've done an internal audit in the company to make sure that what we have said on the side panel actually showed up in the chemistry.
At all points, when the product first goes in the line, when it comes off the line, did we do anything in the production of it that changed a nutrient? Perhaps it was heat labile, or we lost a nutrient. And then throughout its shelf life on the grocery store shelf.
That's very interesting. So nutrition is actually involved at the plant, at the production stage, to make sure that what we say is actually what's coming out on the label. Very interesting. All right, Chris, over to you.
My next question is regards the communication plan. So when you develop a food, specifically a food that has a specific purpose, do you communicate to healthcare practitioners first or consumers, or do you communicate to both parties at the same time?
Very interesting. There's so many different stakeholders, media, consumers, healthcare, government. How does that communication plan go together, and who gets it when?
Well, so I can start. So from a consumer perspective, we actually don't start communicating the product or driving awareness of the product until all the other elements are completely done, including that the product is actually available on shelf. So we don't want to drive awareness or help them or guide them into the store until we know that they can actually, when they get there, they can find it. So our communications, like actually introduction to consumer, doesn't start until it is on the shelf.
So then, Loretta, with healthcare professionals and government, sounds like you can go a little bit earlier than the consumer. Tell us about that.
Those are other key elements of the communication plan, not just to consumers, health professionals, government, and what the nutrition role would be to develop the position papers, the Q&As, the key messages, and certainly I think in the case of Vector, mailings out to Dietitians of Canada, introducing the product. So we can do that a little bit earlier on so that they're aware of it.
Right, because it makes sense for healthcare professionals, and particularly dietitians, to know about a new product before their consumer, their client base gets it. So if they get a question, they have all the information. Or if the dietitian has a question about the product, they can go back to Kellogg's or whatever company and ask them for further information before their client comes to them.
And that helps us too.
Right, right. Okay, Chris.
My next question is regarding the timeline from the first stage in development to the last stage and how long it typically takes.
This is very interesting. We did it in I'm looking at the time here, probably in an hour. How long does this take?
So it all depends on what you're innovating. In the case of Vector, it's definitely a much longer timeline because you're starting from scratch. You started with just an idea and someone asked a question. So in the case where you're totally innovative, it could take years. It could take 2 to 3 years to actually get it to market because you do have a lot of things that you're doing along the way to make sure you're meeting the needs of the consumers and that we're meeting the nutritional elements criteria that we need to meet. If we're doing something as simple as just launching a new flavor extension of an existing food, we do still touch on every aspect of the development of the innovation process, but it's not as intense because the brand already exists or the packaging already exists or the consumer need already exists. It takes a much shorter time. So that can go months versus years.
Now, to that point, though, I'm interested, though, if you said you have these days and people are curious, but if a new idea comes up, can you just start at any time if you say, wow, nutrition science just told me about this, this could be a neat idea. Can you actually just start any time?
Absolutely. It's not something that you say, on December 15th, this is when we're going to start generating ideas. It's just natural.
Okay.
And as they come up, you start investigating them. You start figuring out what's the so what, can we do it, should we do it, shouldn't we do it?
All right, Loretta, did you want to add to that?
Certainly, it's not a linear process either, so we're continuously looking at the science, seeing what some of the new ideas might be. In the case of Vector, before we, officially started, we were bantering around that idea for probably 5 or 6 years prior, and really we keep a lot of ideas in the hopper, and if one might not be the right time to go because it's not, the consumer's not ready for it, or the regulations don't keep up with it, well, then follow another product idea.
But you raised a very good point. If nutrition science has all this science and they're giving it, sharing it with marketing, but they got to say, marketing goes, this is great, but the consumer's not there yet. Let's hold off till they get there, because something that's science-driven with no consumer following probably isn't going to do well in the market.
It's not, right?
Yeah, very interesting. I think, Chris, we've got time for maybe just one more question. What do you have out there?
With all of the research and science involved, and along every step of the way of a new product development, why do so many products fail, and how do you determine when a product has outlived its time on shelf?
Wow, how do you know when it's time to say goodbye to a product?
So the best way to know is watch consumers and watch consumer behavior and their consumption of it. When you see that is starting to slow down or decrease, that's when you start taking actions to identify, can we get it back up? Is there something that's missing? Do we need to do something differently? There's metrics that we follow internally that we have established in terms of this product has a long life or it has a shorter life. It all depends on what the objectives are. But basically, it's the consumer that tells us when it's time that that product has outlived itself.
So it's very interesting, because I'm thinking that if that maybe, when you talked earlier on about, cultural insights and consumer insights and trends and fads, maybe is this sometimes when a product comes off the shelf, is that the end of a trend and another trend is starting?
Yeah, so you'll see it sometimes where one comes off and another one comes on, and it is following those trends, and it is following the consumer behaviors.
Very good. Wow, this has been absolutely very interesting, diving deep into this whole process with both of you, learning it from the lens of the nutrition scientist, the lens of the marketing department, the lens of all the different other functions. We've gone through this, again, conception to consumption. We've looked at not an iterative, I guess it's an iterative process, not a step-by-step process, the curiosity, the exploration, the validation, and then the introduction. A lot of good information here. I know the one thing that sort of I've learned from all of this is that, and you both have been saying it, it's very consumer-driven. Very much what's out there in any new product, any company, every category. It's really what the consumer wants. It's looking at the trends, not the fads, but more importantly, or equally as important, making sure there's that scientific justification to support the consumer in what they're looking for in a new food product. So this has been very good. Thank you very much. Thank you to Chris for all of the questions out there. Thank you to Camilla, and thank you to Loretta. This has been a very interesting time. Thank you very much.